Mr. President, I think tomorrow that President Trump is going to, at least planning to sign an executive order rolling back the Obama Clean Power Plan. And I have a lot to say about that, but I think it's important and an appropriate time to discuss the history of this issue. It's been going on a long time. At the start of the 114th Congress and the Senate, we voted 98-1 in support of the Inhofe White House amendment stating that climate change is real and not a hoax. Well, that's something that we can actually agree on. The climate has been changing since the beginning of time. There's all the archaeological evidence, there's the scriptural evidence, the historic evidence. Climate has been changing and will continue to change. The hoax is that some on the far left believe man controls changes in the climate, and we've endured 8 years of an administration that buys into the alarmist mentality that the world's coming to an end and it's due to man-made gases. That's what the hoax is. And even those individuals, occasionally you'll find some scientists who agree with this, but they'll say that this is it may be some contribution, but it is minimal, it's not even measurable. The Obama administration has used climate change as justification for taking unauthorized actions such as the so-called Clean Power Plan. Every administrative entity under the Obama was forced to embrace his climate change agenda as a top priority and used as a convenient sounding board. We've seen agencies such as the Department of Defense divert resources away from the core responsibilities and instead are spent on finding ways to justify statements from the president that climate change is the greatest threat, a greater threat than terrorism. So other agencies have spared no taxpayer expense in supporting the outcome-driven science in an attempt to bolster their claims. In fact, the Congressional Research Service has reported that the Obama administration spent $120 billion on climate change issues. It was a total waste of money. You know, I don't think anyone can tell me what that $120 billion was spent for. It wasn't authorized, it wasn't appropriated, but it was spent. And this comes from the Congressional Research Service. So this was a total waste of money, money needed to defend America. Now, despite the administration's efforts, as research and data around the climate change continue to improve, the results do not support their claims, but instead call them into question. This is especially true for all of the hottest month or hottest season or hottest year in history. This is something that is often claimed by those who are reading the script and trying to make those claims. 2014 was previously the warmest record on year until a reporter pressed NOAA and NASA on the claim, and the agencies were forced to admit that they were only 38% sure that that claim was accurate. December 2015 study from the American Geophysical Union concluded that after analyzing over 1,200 ground-based weather stations, they said this. They said, and this is a quote, "The warmest ever claims by government scientists are inflated due to compromised U.S. temperature stations impacted by encroachment of artificial surfaces like concrete, asphalt, and heat sources like air conditioning exhaust. Because of NOAA's methods, they fail to account for these factors. Now, additionally, surface thermometers continue to be at odds with satellite data, which shows essentially no warming for the past 18 years, continuing the hiatus that The Economist magazine originally wrote about in 2013. In fact, just a few weeks ago, a whistleblower alleged that a June 2015 NOAA report manipulated data in an attempt to discredit this 18-year pause. Now, the 18-year pause has been agreed to. People understand this is what they call the hiatus. This is a time when temperature has not changed. But they've done this to influence the public debate surrounding the Clean Power Plan and the Paris Climate Conference. Conveniently, the computer with the data suffered a complete failure and none of the data was saved. It's not just the inflated temperature claims that can be called into question. A growing body of scientific study suggests variations in solar radiation and natural climate variability have a leading role in climate change. Now, that's a novel idea, that the sun has something to do with warming. A number of the independent studies assessing the impact of clouds have even suggested that water vapor feedback is entirely canceled out by cloud processes. Global data shows no increase in the number of or the intensity of hurricanes, tornadoes, droughts, or floods, in spite of what they say on the Senate floor. Even the IPCC's 213 report concluded that the current data sets indicate no significant observed trends in global tropical cyclone frequency over the past century. No robust trends, annual numbers of tropical storms, hurricanes, and major hurricanes count has been identified in the past 100 years in the North Atlantic basin. But we still hear it over and over again. When it comes to droughts, the IPCC report indicated that previous conclusions regarding global increases trend in drought since the 1970s were probably overstated. The increasing observations from the scientist Craig Idso suggests a much reduced and practically harmless climate response to the increased amount of atmospheric carbon dioxide. Further, there are benefits from the increasing carbon that have led to a greening of the planet and contributed to increased agricultural productivity. Now, this shows that the progression that's taken place, the green parts, are the part where they have an increased amount of CO2 activity, and it's the trend in the annual gross productivity per decade in a percentage, and this is from 1982 to 2011. So you can see the great benefits. In fact, so many people still remind us over and over again that CO2 is not a pollutant, it is actually a fertilizer. It helps things grow. But these points were kept out of the Obama administration's press releases, and the media has been more than willing to go along. None of this is surprising, as I've given a lot of speeches on climate change, and my message tends to be one that the alarmists, the far left, do not want to hear and do not want to believe, but they have been proven wrong time and time again. Despite millions of dollars of the Tom Steyers of the world, Americans do care about climate change, and but it's not high on their list. And right now, which I will say in just a moment, some of the polling activity that's taken place has surprised a lot of people. Yeah, this is Tom Steyer. We keep hearing about the Koch brothers and other people who are putting money in the campaign, but Tom Steyer is the one who has said, and that was his statement, that prior to the 2014 races, that he was going to put $100 million in there to elect people to do away with, to promote such things as the Obama's plan. The Environment and Public Works Committee last Congress, and this is when I chaired that committee, we held 10 hearings assessing the president's climate agenda, where we heard from a diverse group of expert witnesses that testified to the enormous costs, especially for low-income minority communities, the economic consequences, the legal vulnerabilities, and the minuscule environmental impacts. You know, we had the president of the Black Chamber of Commerce, Harry Alford, come to hearing, and he was the one who talked about how disproportionate the harm is done to the poorer people. He talked about the blacks and the Hispanics that are on risk, and I would elaborate on that in just a moment. Taking committee actions is a further step. The Democrats and Republicans in both houses of Congress rejected Obama and the radical left's key climate regulations. Then in February of last year, the United States Supreme Court put a stay on the so-called Clean Power Plan because they too have significant legal questions surrounding the validity of this. Well, needless to say, there's a well-documented substantive rejection to Obama's climate actions across the institution designed to keep executive branch in check. I've not attended one of the United Nations climate conferences since 2009, when I was kind of a one-man truth squad in Copenhagen. Let me mention what this is. You know, the United Nations, and they were the ones that started the whole thing in the very beginning, and talking about global warming, talking about all the problems that were out there. And we have a pretty documented case. In fact, there's a book that was written, that I won't mention the name of the book, that comes to the conclusion that the United Nations were right in the middle of this whole discussion as far back as 1972. And so what the United Nations does is every year they have a big party. This is the big party of the year. It's in December. And they've had 21 in 21 consecutive years. And what they do is invite everybody to come in who says that we will voluntarily reduce targets for CO2 emissions. And of course, most of them that come in are coming in to get some of the billions of dollars that they say they're going to be distributing. This is really interesting because these parties, I can remember one time I was talking to someone I know from Benin, West Africa. In fact, the chair knows this individual too. And I saw him at one of these meetings. And I said, "Now, you don't go along with all of this." He said, "No, but this is the biggest party of the year." You know, and so they have these every year. And that's what I think is important for people to understand. Anyway, I hadn't gone to any of these since the big event in Copenhagen, but the message I carried to the international bureaucrats then is exactly what happened. Congress did not, and then does not now, support the radical climate change actions, and the United States' role in any associated international agreement will be limited accordingly. The outlook for environmental activists and climate change alarmists is grim, with the significant losses in the White House, the Congress, and the Supreme Court, and a persistently skeptical public. Their political leverage and relevance has dwindled. For the past 8 years, the Obama administration, the American economy, has suffered under the effects of the climate agenda. That era is over, and President Trump is already delivering on his campaign promises. Just a few weeks ago, I was at the White House when President Trump signed an executive order instructing the EPA to roll back the Waters of the United States rule. This is the rule that would have allowed the EPA to regulate waters in the United States. I think most people know that this has always been regulated by the states. But you get the true liberals, they want to have regulation taking place, not by the states, but in Washington. A guy named Tom Buchanan is the Oklahoma Farm Bureau chairman. And, you know, he was talking about, of all of the problems that farmers have throughout America, farmers and ranchers, the biggest problems they have are overregulation by the EPA. And you know what he singled out to as to be the most onerous of all of these regulations? It was the regulation on water. And of course, I was in there when the president did away with that particular rule. Now, as I previously mentioned, President Trump is also committed to rolling back the Clean Power Plan and its $300 billion price tag. This rule would lead to dramatic increases in energy prices and reduce the reliability of the grid. These two rules are examples of major expansions of federal power and a departure from the core functions and responsibilities provided by Congress to the EPA. The steps taken by the Trump administration will return the rules of those agencies to their statutory intent. We've seen great successes in our air and water quality based on the EPA operating within its statutory limits. I can remember the 1990 amendments to the Clean Air Act. Right now, at the same time that our pollution has dramatically dropped down, and this is at a time when vehicle miles have actually doubled. So we're doing some things that are successful, and I look forward to continuing that success. Now, that's the